following video discusses some organizational strategies and advice for organizing paragraphs. Man, I'm starving. I can get a snack here. Let's open the pantry. Oh, wow. That is a disaster. Look at that. I got snacks on the top here. There's another row here with some snacks. Another row here. Even some fruit snacks on the ground there. And not to mention the canned goods. Look, there's some on the floor, some on the second row. This row, it looks like I attempted to organize here with some canned goods. And there's this lone mushroom soup can here. Also, look, I have empty boxes. This is pantry fluff. It has no value to my pantry whatsoever. Clearly, I think I'm in need of some organizational help. Now, this cupboard might not seem all that bad. I mean, as long as I know where things are, I know where the ingredients are, I can make do with this. So this isn't really a great metaphor because when we're writing papers, we're trying to help our readers understand. And I just need to know how to use this for my own purposes. So a better metaphor might be like coming into an unknown house and looking into someone's cupboard and trying to make sense of it all. And to be honest, even that doesn't fully get at the complexity of organizing an academic paper. Because when we're writing an academic paper, right, we're trying to extend knowledge. We're trying to push knowledge forward. And we have to be aware that our readers might be skeptical about our statements. They might approach our ideas with disagreement or just confusion, right? So this doesn't really get at that complexity. However, I will say that there are some things we can learn from a pantry about organization. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of those things. Alright, organization. Well, at its core, whether you're organizing a pantry, a desk, or your paper, organization involves the logical grouping and separating of things into manageable segments. In effect, the need to organize presupposes that there's just a ton of different kinds of stuff, and that the quantity of that stuff and their slight or perhaps considerable difference from other stuff makes it hard to understand. There's just too much stuff, too many different kinds of things, and it's hard to sort through all that. Furthermore, meaning making really at its core depends on organizing information. So for instance, a caveman who saw this large unknown animal with sharp teeth would be able to grasp and classify that thing as a threat, even if they'd never seen that animal before. Right? And if you start thinking about it, the process of grouping or classifying stimuli is something that we do all the time. It's something we depend on in order to make meaning. You know, for instance, if you wake up one morning and you see an automobile, one you've never seen before, parked on the street in front of your house, you aren't dumbfounded on what this entity is. You know, you're able to look at it and discern that this is a car because it has four wheels, it's self-powered, has headlights, etc. This thing shares qualities and attributes that you've been able to group together and call all things that are similar to this a car. Right? You can easily arrange that information and thus make sense of that new thing. This meaning making depends on creating manageable units of meaning. So back to my cupboard example. Now, there's no one way to organize my cupboard. My organization depends on the kinds of stuff I have. You know, the amount of said stuff and my purpose for organizing. So in this way, if I say had an entire cupboard of snacks, and that'd be awesome, but I would organize that differently than a more diverse cupboard, you know, with baked goods, snacks, cat food, teas, cereals, etc. Because if it was only snacks, then manageable units of meaning might be dividing candy from chips and, you know, those things from crackers, etc. You know, therefore, our first real takeaway about organization is that organization involves creating manageable units or blocks of information to help foster understanding. It's important to note that creating these manageable blocks of information that aid knowledge acquisition and understanding depend on us noticing difference and making those differences visible to readers. I mean, I'm sure that most of you guys know the difference between, chips and crackers, right? Noticing that difference helps me categorize those two entities as different things. Now, if I saw those differences in types of snacks, and I help my readers see those divisions by placing different kinds of snacks on different shelves. So the shelves would act to divide my different units of meaning. In an academic paper, we do something similar, actually. For instance, we will place spaces between a word so that our readers can identify that there's a different words. We also use punctuation marks in sentences. And we also, and the thing that I'm going to talk about primarily today, is we use spaces between paragraphs to signify different units of meaning. The paragraph as a unit of meaning. These artificial divisions help individuals parcel and group meanings into units, thus making it easier to comprehend information. Okay, so what does this all have to do with academic writing? Well, as discussed, we need to create these manageable units of meaning with our paragraphs that help foster understanding. So in the past, we may have been given some strategies to help organize information, namely the 5-paragraph essay. The 5-paragraph essay's basic structure basically ensures that you really don't have to give much thought to organization, to be honest. The intro and the conclusion are 2 of the paragraphs, and then our 3 reasons for our thesis become the 3 body paragraphs. With this format, usually your 3 reasons end up being 3 topics that you're going to discuss. So for example, I might have a thesis that said, Douglas is emotionally effective because he refers to children, home, and physical abuse. For shorter papers, this might work, and it's worth noting that your organizational system will stem primarily from your thesis, so this approach does have some value. Because the thesis is the primary focus or direction of the paper. The thesis also is the most important organizational tool to direct your focus and organize the content of the paper, because the paragraphs should all be an extension and defense of the position articulated in the thesis. So we want to make sure that all the paragraphs closely connect to the thesis. However, as we discussed in our analysis videos, keen insights, smart insights, are rarely found by covering a wide range of topics. Because without focus, we'll only barely be able to scratch the surface and come up with only superficial statements. In this way, 1 paragraph on, say, children in Douglas is probably not going to help readers see many of the ways this rhetorical device is working, how it's able to work, why it's used, and its overall significance in Douglas's work. It'd be better to have the entire paper focused on children, or at the very least a couple of different paragraphs. Furthermore, if you are writing a 5-page paper, the children paragraph would probably be about 1.5 to 2 pages long. That's not a manageable unit of meaning. It's just too large and cumbersome to have any use value. Also, the readers would only know that this huge paragraph has something to do with children and persuasion. But aside from that, they really have no understanding of what the purpose or point of the paragraph is. So that broad purpose really isn't that useful. Not to mention the fact that most writers have multiple paragraphs or even entire papers on one single topic. So if topics aren't the best way to organize our information, what might we use instead? Well, for individual paragraphs, particularly those found in argumentative essays, I suggest organizing around what's called a main idea. A main idea is not simply a topic, but also it's your point about that topic, your idea about that topic. The formula I like to use is a main idea equals the topic considered plus your specific point about that topic. For my Douglas example, I might have a paragraph on children. That is the topic I want to consider. And my point about that topic might be that discussing children helps humanize the atrocities for the audience. Now remember what I said earlier, the spacing between a paragraph signifies a changing idea. A slightly different unit of meaning that I want my reader to be aware of. And let me be clear, hopefully that unit of meaning is subtly or slightly different so that all my paragraphs are connected in some way. It doesn't feel like I'm writing an entirely new paper. So, what we need to do with our main idea is if either your topic or your point about that topic shifts, we need to create a new paragraph to help our readers notice a shifting of ideas. So back to my Douglas example. I might have another paragraph that says the figure of children also helps connect to the reader's family values and personalizes the message. Notice that my point about this topic has now shifted. So now I have a new paragraph to help my readers see my idea has slightly changed a little bit. Now, as I've suggested, what I've found useful to help create these focused units of meaning centers around this concept of a main idea. To articulate this main idea, it's helpful to use a topic sentence. Now, before I get into topic sentence, I want to say that I don't like the term. Instead, I'd like you to think of a topic sentence as an argument sentence. A mini thesis statement, if you will. Now, many professional writers do not include argument sentences at the beginning of the paragraph, or indeed some don't even use them at all. But still, if we were to look at their paragraphs, we would find that each paragraph has an implied main idea, and that by and large, each paragraph is rigorously and expertly arranged around that specific main idea. So I highly suggest that you include an argument sentence at the beginning of your paragraph so as to organize the content of your paragraph. It'll just make your lives easier. It will also help you keep focused, and in an academic paper, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of your readers are expecting these argument sentences near the beginning of your paragraphs. Okay, so some rules about these argument sentences. First, they should declare the topic of consideration and your point, the main idea as we just discussed previously. Also, and this is the biggest problem that people face with argument sentences, is try to make them as narrow as possible. If your argument sentence leads you to write a page-long paragraph, you probably need to narrow that claim. If I had an argument sentence that said, Douglas uses children to persuade, I'm creating a broad claim that honestly might be more suited for a thesis statement, and even there, this argument sentence is still too vague and broad. And this is because a broad argument sentence does not do much work organizing content and creating manageable units of meaning. Units of meaning that are coherent and unified around a very specific purpose. A broad topic sentence, or a broad thesis for that matter, would be like going to the zoo and seeing an exhibit called Animals. That organizational structure or fence is just too broad to help account for and control all the variants of possible meaning that would be included in that grouping. It does not limit the possible units of meaning, and thus it's not that useful in a focused analytical essay. A more narrow focus, however, will help the reader parcel out more detailed and specific meanings. For example, we might organize the Douglas paragraph around our specific reason that children are persuasive for him. Or we might have a paragraph about the specific significance of this rhetorical strategy for Douglas. Or we might have a point about why he uses this strategy as an effective tool. Therefore, when you're creating an argument sentence, you really should ask yourself this question. What is the specific argument that I want my reader to understand and consider when they're done reading this paragraph? Now, conversely, if your argument sentences are too specific, then we're going to have a bunch of very, very short paragraphs that in total make it hard for our reader to understand how all those paragraphs are connected to the overall argument or thesis. And also, this small paragraph strategy disrupts the flow of our paper. Still, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Short paragraphs are rarely a problem, as most students think too broadly and stay very surface level when discussing and analyzing an issue. And also, the short paragraphs is usually an issue not of organization, but of not analyzing your topic with much depth. Also, it's worth noting that short paragraphs, even one-sentence paragraphs, do exist and can be rhetorically effective if they're used sparingly and for some kind of effect. Okay, so the takeaways today are we want to create these manageable units of meaning. Manageable units of meaning centered around a main idea. We want to outline this main idea by using a very clear and focused argument sentence. And finally, when we're looking at our paragraph, we want to make sure that everything in that paragraph obviously connects to the argument sentence, and that argument sentence helps illuminate and explain the thesis statement. Okay, so that ends our discussion of organization. Go ahead and take the quiz, and good luck.